it's Hailey, and today I'm going to be talking about some of my favorite standalone novels. So I did this video actually a while ago. I did it when I used to like include music in the background of my videos. It has been a little while, so I'm not going to be repeating any titles from that last video because they're titles that I talk about pretty frequently, so you know that I love them already. But I have 6 new books to add to this ever-growing collection of favorite standalones. I love standalones. Sometimes I think I might enjoy them more than series, and a big reason for that is I like when you have the beginning and the end of an entire story all at once and you can just savor it and really get into that world and then be done with it and move on to another entire world and new characters. I love series too, don't get me wrong, but sometimes it's just really nice to have the entire completed story right in front of you for you to enjoy. So I have some awesome titles to talk about, and like I said, I don't think that I talked about them in my other video, hopefully not, but let's just get into it. First is one that I'm really surprised that I didn't mention in that other video because it is a book that I have loved for such a long time, so I don't know how I didn't mention it, but I will make up for that now, and that is The Strange and Beautiful Sorrows of Lavender by Leslie Walton. I read this book a couple of years ago and absolutely fell in love with it. It is so beautifully written and such an incredible story. This is a magical realism, which is pretty much the closest you're gonna get to fantasy on this list because there's not really any fantasy standalones. Every time there's a fantasy standalone and it's marketed as such, they seem to announce a sequel, unfortunately. But this book is about Lavender and her family, particularly the woman in her family. The first little bit is following their history and kind of leading up to the story, and I didn't expect that, but it was very well done, wonderfully crafted. So the thing about Lavender is that she was born with wings, and no one knows why. It's just kind of a fact about her. So as you pick up the pieces of her family and kind of get to know who they are, you kind of understand maybe how she became who she is, and you follow her as she is 16 years old and trying to fit in, even though obviously she has some abnormalities to her that make it very difficult for her. So this book is just so good. It's very whimsical. It has a great message to it. It's very intense too at points, so definitely be aware of that. There are some triggers associated with this book, so if that's something that you're worried about, check it out. This book just didn't feel like a standalone. The story had romantic elements to it, but family was also really important, and you get an entire story that is just woven, and it will just make its way into your heart and be a story that you won't forget about. It just didn't read like a standalone at all because it felt so wonderfully crafted, and like I had read an entire like 12 book series on this family because I felt like I knew them so well and understood everything about their world and how they came to be. If you haven't tried a magical realism before, I highly recommend it. It's a genre that I don't think there's enough of because I really enjoy it. So basically what it is realistic or contemporary fiction, but with a magical twist going on to it. It's not like urban fantasy because that's entirely different. You kind of have that home and then away element in urban fantasy, but in magical realism, everything resembles the real world except there's a tiny kind of magical twist going on to it. So this is definitely my favorite magical realism and one of my favorite standalones and one of my favorite books of all time, and I highly recommend it. Next is Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. I was encouraged by Zoe and Hannah to read this book, and I'm so glad that I did. I don't think I would have picked it up otherwise because I'm not really a big fan of the cover, to be honest, and it's one of those kind of under the radar books that I think should be talked about a lot more because the subject matter that it deals with is so important. I think this is a book that you should really just go into not knowing about it and be pleasantly surprised by it. So all I'm really going to say is that it deals with school and the education system and the fact that everyone is tested in the same way and that the path for success that society thinks is the only path really isn't. There's so many different ways that you can be a successful human and you can be happy. You don't need to do what makes you unhappy just because it's what you think is right or what society tells you is right. I think that if you are a high school student, this book would be so helpful for you. I highly encourage that you read it because it has such an important and powerful message, and really anyone who's going through a period of transition and trying to figure figure out who they are and dealing with the expectations that are put on them by other people and trying to reconcile that with who they feel they are, read this book because I think it will do wonders for you and help you through that journey. Next is Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I'm sure you guys know who John Green is. He's the author of Looking for Alaska, The Fault in Our Stars, Paper Towns. He is very well known and for good reason. This book is on brand for him, but also very different. It's very, very honest and almost startlingly, you know what I'm trying to say, accurate, because you feel like this is a real character and you're really brought into the mind of Asa. I can't actually remember if it's Asa or Asa, but the synopsis I think kind of leads you to a different direction than the story actually ends up going. So it's about this fugitive billionaire and they're trying to find him, but that's not really the main story that's going on. The main storyline is about Asa and her own struggles. She is struggling with OCD and anxiety, and you get an inside look at how her thoughts spiral every single day. And I think for anyone that has struggled with any mental illness, this is a very relatable story. Definitely do be aware though, because it could be incredibly triggering because it is so well done. Like, you can tell that John Green is writing from experience, and he writes this beautiful story that's also really uncomfortable to read because it brings to mind some thoughts, at least for me, that I had before. And it's very difficult to read about a character who is in a place where you have been and it's not really a great place. But that being said, I did still love this book because it was just so incredibly well done. And once again, I feel like it's a story that deals with things that aren't really dealt with that often in young adult fiction, and I feel like they should be more. Like, I don't think I've really read any other books that deal with OCD. I've definitely read other books about mental illness, but I feel like this one did a really good job in particular of dealing with having a mental illness and suffering yourself and not being able to give the time and energy that you might want to friendships, which is something that is a real struggle. So I loved its portrayal of that, and I think that it was just such an unflinchingly honest portrait of what it's like to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. Next is The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. This is actually coming out as a movie this year, so if you haven't read it yet, definitely go and pick up a copy because it is so good. Nicola Yoon is the author of Everything, which is a story that I really enjoyed up until the end. The end kind of ruined it a little bit for me, but the difference was with this book, the end really made it for me. I loved it the whole way through, but the end really solidified that. I cannot wait to see it adapted into a movie because it's a very timely story, and I think that it does the unexpected and really makes you think. So this follows two characters. We have Natasha, who is very logically minded. She believes in facts and the math of things, and she is kind of science-based. If you were to go with the right brain, left brain thing, which apparently doesn't actually exist, but if you were to go with that kind of mindset, she would be the left brain, whereas we have Daniel, who would be the right brain. He has always been the model child, but when he meets Natasha, he kind of gets lost and becomes a dreamer. He believes that this could actually happen even though it couldn't, because Natasha is actually facing deportation to Jamaica. So she has 24 hours left in New York City before she'll be sent back to somewhere where she's never even been. So the two of them meet, and it's kind of this romance that is impossible, and both of them know it, but Daniel really wants to believe in it, and you want to believe in it, and you're just brought into this 24-hour period, and you go through a whole whirlwind over that period of time. It's one of my favorite relationships that I've read about because it's so unique, and the story overall is a romance, but also like an anti-romance, but there's so many things that happen within these pages. I just think you should read it, especially with the movie coming out. Now is the perfect time. Next is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. This is a story that deals with a main character whose mother has just committed suicide, so do be aware that depression and discussions of suicide are a prevalent topic of this story, so if those are triggers for you, then definitely avoid it. But I have to say, I think this is one of my absolute favorite depictions of mental illness, one of the most accurate ones that I've ever read, especially because it's not the main character who's suffering from the mental illness, it's someone that she loves who is suffering. And that is something that I feel like with all these books I've said that, but I think that it needs to be seen more. You have a lot of books where the main character is the one who is struggling with their illness, but I don't think I know a single person who doesn't have someone in their life that they know that has been touched by mental illness and has been dealing with it. And as someone on the outside of that situation, I think that it's so difficult to deal with. And one of the main things is the why. This book deals with that question and the other question emotions that arise when something like what happens in this book happens so incredibly well. But it also is a very diverse story because you have the main character, Lee. She's discovering her own heritage. So she's half white and half Asian, and her mother is the one who is Asian in her family. So she was from Taiwan, but Lee was never exposed to that side of her family. She never knew anything about them. She didn't really get to know her culture that well, and she never met her grandparents. But Lee believes that when her mother died, she turned into a bird, and that bird, she believes, is telling her that she needs to go to Taiwan to go and meet her grandparents. So she ends up traveling there, and she learns all about her culture, all about her heritage, how her mother grew up, and who her mother was. I think that if you are in the right mindset to read this story, you absolutely should, because it is so good. The main complaint I've seen about it is that it's slow, but I didn't mind that at all. It is a bit slow, but that's because it's a story that you need to take your time with, and there's not really a lot of action happening because it's not that kind of story. It was just so beautiful and so well done, and I highly recommend it. And my final recommendation is Sadie by Courtney Summers. So this is kind of switching gears a little bit here because while this is a contemporary story, it's also kind of a mystery. This has so many triggers, so if this is something that you are worried about, definitely check out the Goodreads page and see what the triggers are, because I wouldn't want anyone to read anything that's triggering. But this follows Sadie, and Sadie is going on this revenge mission basically. So she is now deemed missing because she just disappeared to try and avenge her sister's death. She had taken care of her sister Maddie. She had raised her. They had been basically all by themselves, and because of that isolation, they obviously came to care for each other a lot. But then when Maddie is found dead and the police don't really do much about it, the investigation is just really terrible, Sadie takes off determined to find justice for her sister. On the other hand, we have West, who hears about what Sadie's doing and becomes obsessed with tracking her movements and following it on this podcast. So because of the podcast, there's kind of an auditory element to the story. I listened to the audiobook, and I would highly recommend that you do the same. Same goes for radio silence actually, because there is an auditory element to that as well. So I do have a link down below for Audible. If you wanted to sign up for a free trial, you will get 2 free audiobooks. I obviously recommend Sadie and Radio Silence from this list, but there are so many other great audiobooks out there as well. But this is probably one of the darkest young adult novels that I've ever read, but it was also such a great story. Since it's a mystery, I don't want to say too much about it, but I think that it was very well done and really scary and kind of creepy, but it read like an actual true crime story, and I think a lot of that had to do with the audiobook and that podcast element that it had going for it. So if you're looking for a mystery that will kind of keep you on your toes and also make you deeply uncomfortable and kind of terrify you, this is a great one. So those are all of my favorite standalones right now. I hope you guys found something from this list to read, hopefully, but let me know if you have actually read any of these books, your thoughts on them, or what some of your favorite standalones are. And while you're doing that, don't forget to click that subscribe button and then click that bell icon so you'll be notified whenever I post a new video. I post very often. There's constantly new content coming out. So thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!